work, and that's because there's settings.
And also true for the local ChatGPT.
No, so the local ChatGPT can actually run completely offline. However, you do need to disable these things if you don't want to share your data whenever you are online. I believe are people in the webinar right now? Are you in the webinar?
No, I'm
No?
not.
Okay.
Didn't even see a link to the webinar.
Okay. So just making sure we're still sharing.
I'm in the webinar.
Okay. Okay. The last thing is, I would say we would like to enable multi-factor authentication, because in case your account is leaked somewhere, you don't want people to build tokens. You could build hundreds of dollars within an hour by doing API calls. So I would enable this. The next thing we need to talk about is you can actually personalize GPT for your specific needs. So if you go to customize ChatGPT, there are a couple options here. Custom instructions, you provide information about yourself to ChatGPT. This enables it to put more emphasis on the things you write about. So a good example is, on my case, I mentioned I'm a data scientist. I use Python, C, C++, and SQL. And I use a blend of data analysis, problem solving, and software engineering with GPT. And I go on into a little bit more detail down here. You don't need the additional detail. I just like to do it just in case it helps a little bit more. You could also just answer these questions up here, and that should be completely fine. Now, on the bottom portion here, it's more of stylization. How do you want things to be? Do you want things to be detailed, verbose? Personally, I like it short and clear because I'm trying to get things done very quickly all the time. And down here, there are some ChatGPT capabilities. I believe the web search, DALL-E, and Code are all available to free accounts. Canvas is only for the paid account. Web search allows ChatGPT to go beyond its current knowledge base and search the web for whatever resource you're looking for. So it's actually become a very good tool for search and web scraping. You can use DALL-E to create images, and Code, well, that's pretty much why we're here. Now, we talk about interacting with ChatGPT, which is probably the most important portion. If you don't know how to interact with LLMs, then you won't be able to use them or leverage them to help you do your work. We can do a simple question like explain the fundamental theory of calculus. Also, don't worry about any typos. It actually corrects them for you. And we can get a very quick response. We can usually expect something that comes out of a textbook. And as you can see, it's a little bit slower this morning, but it happens. So it goes over the key concepts, differentiation, integration. Then it goes into the actual formulas that we use. And this should look pretty familiar to everyone here. However, what happens if, say, you're not familiar with something like calculus, or you're trying to learn a new topic? Then you can use prompting to shift this to be more digestible. So a simple follow-up prompt like, explain it like I am 5. can actually shift the whole thing. So now it gives me a very simple example of both travel and speed, or in this. So this example is very concise. Then it starts over the applications of how our example is integration, and we'll go into differentiation. And while this is helpful, we don't really want this either. What we want is both a very low level example followed by the technicals. So we can actually stitch all of this together by a last prompt, which would be buying the two responses into one narrative. And here we're stitching everything together. Ideally, when it comes to data science, you not only are technical, but you're also able to show your expertise or the specific data insights to customers, colleagues, or stakeholders. As we can see, it takes the first example of explaining it to me like I'm 5. It starts becoming a little bit more complicated, and then provides us with an additional way to think about it. Not super technical like the beginning, but also not dumbed down to the point of a 5-year-old. So what do we have to understand here? It's that LLMs excel at adopting and dynamically adjusting their depth. They're also very good at extracting content from statements. The information about calculus from the beginning was actually extracted from training data, likely some calculus books. Lastly, restructuring using prompting can create something like an analysis, a summary, or perhaps an email, a lengthy one, a short one. So with that being said, we can go ahead and stop sharing the page. We do have some questions. Okay. All right. And it looks like the audio is working just fine now. Just give me a second. I'm trying to skip some Mac updates. And we're back to the slides. So by definition, prompting is the context of pre-trained transformers. How do we do this? We interact with them using natural language. Now you can use voice, but what it actually does, it converts the voice into written text and then is able to process it. Our input is always text, and it's always the context provider. So if you're thinking about it in terms of programming, it's kind of like a seed. Where do you start off and then you can branch out? So context is everything when it comes to LLMs, not just ChatGPT. You can influence the output and you can have dynamic interactions as we just did. Now, how to improve your prompts. So this is more of a science, and I've done a 4-hour workshop for ISR on this specific topic. For today, let's just summarize it very quickly. There's 3 main pillars, I like to call them, which is to stylize. That means, do you want simple, technical, formal, informal? Do you want persuasive? Do you want a sales pitch? Do you want to be creative? Do you want a specific writing style? Next, we go over to format. Do you want summaries? Do you want bullet points? Do you want tables, text files, PDFs, PowerPoint slides, whatever it might be? The last thing is to restrict. Restrict is not a requirement. However, it can help when it comes to hallucinations. Yep.
So since we're going to talk about data analysis, I mean, prompting has rather limited capacity in terms of feeding data. How do you couple the prompts to specific data files or?
Yep, so we'll actually go directly into that right after the section. And lastly is to restrict. So do we want one sentence, one paragraph, extremely detailed? Do we want to use the open web? Do we want sources between a specific time? These are all examples of restrictions. I would say usually if you want to be as safe as possible, you want to restrict the queries. If not, you can run into problems. If you're interested on prompting, which is the most important skill you need to have, there should be a link, and this was shared with everyone. If you don't have the link to the PowerPoint slides, please let me know. It is also in the chat in the live webinar, so you can click on it, head over there. So there's a prompting engineering guide up there that's actually full, I would say a full academic guide on how to do prompting professionally. For the purpose of today, we'll only focus on probably the first 4. Anything after that, it's a little bit more, I would say, lengthy. However, it can produce extremely good results, especially something like RAG, retrieval, analyze, and generate. And with that, we're on to our second part. This will be the lengthiest part of today's workshop. I'm not sure if we'll get to part 4 and 5. However, you're free to read over those sections after the presentation. So before we go forward, are there any questions about prompting, resources, about the GPT privacy or interface? Let's go ahead and open up. So we have a couple questions here. We lost the computer screen on Zoom, just showing. Okay. Okay. So sharing again? Okay. You just keep an eye on that thing. And sorry that we lost the sharing of the screen. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. If so, please let me know. And there was one question about ChatGPT. Let me go ahead and view it. Oh, it says link to the prompting guide. So if you go to the general chat, I send out a link to this workshop. Should be right here. If people aren't able to access it, please let me know. So this is a folder. It has everything from the PowerPoint slides to the data we'll be using today.
Where can I get that?
That should be to the,
No, I don't have access to your equipment.
oh, okay, you don't have access to the webinar.
I'll get it later.
Yep. But everything should be included there. And we'll go ahead and start the second section.
Sorry to interrupt, the chat in the webinar is disabled.
Okay.
You should be able to use the. Right, we shared some.
Could you enable the chat? That way other people are able to see all the questions that are also coming, and I'm answering them as we go. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and start. The technicians currently are working on sharing that link out to everyone. That should include the data we're about to use. And hopefully some people can follow along. In the meantime, we can go ahead and get started. So if you're looking at the slides from home, I won't be showing them as we work through this. However, I've written out a data analysis guide for everyone if you're not super familiar with data analysis, how to do it, and some starter questions that you can use. Just tailor them to your specific needs. So first we have understanding data set and modeling objective, data quality assessment, EDA, feature engineering and pre-processing, data splitting and sampling strategies, identifying potential challenges, a preliminary modeling and insights that we could take. And lastly, reporting and documentation. So we'll go over these sections and I'll go ahead and share my screen on the ChatGPT interface and we can go ahead and start this process.
Can you send the sharing to us on the Zoom, and we'll send it back over?
Yeah. I think I sent it already to host and panel.
Yeah, I think we need it again, I'm sorry.
Okay. So I'll send it to Kelly, okay? All right. Okay.
Should be sent.
Okay. And can you make sure that okay. Let me know if the sharing of the screen cuts off at any point. Okay. And how do we add data to the GPT platform? We can actually click the attach files button down here and either connect it to Google Drive. If you have access to this on a non-UMich email, you could connect the data set directly.
But UMGPT doesn't have a link to connect to Google Drive. How would I?
UMGPT is very limited and hopefully we get to do that. Hopefully. We'll talk about its limitations and I'll also have a link to ITS's full guide on how to use UMGPT. So we'll go ahead and upload from my local folder the first data set, which is the disease symptoms and patient profile data set. And here begins our first prompt. Which is we want to provide it an identity. So we'll say you are a data analyst. Will help me work throughout this data set. And GPT will load. It will likely take maybe 30 seconds. This is a smaller data set, but I'm hoping we can get through it in about 40 minutes. So telling it that it's a data analyst is actually very important because it can shift the context and start providing us with some of these columns and a little bit about them, such as, are they Boolean values, yes or no, categorical, are they numeric? So all these things will come up. Yep.
So you were saying that this tiny data set takes a long time to load. What if you have a huge data set, gigabyte size data set?
So something like 5 gigabytes will load, and my experience tops 50 seconds.
Okay.
It's additionally going through the columns and checking the data types. It takes longer for GPT. And he just asked, what if we have larger data sets? And the answer is, up to about 5 gigs, you could handle it. If you have higher tier accounts, you could upload, I believe, up to 10 gigabytes of data. But keep in mind that everything you do on ChatGPT is probably being accessed by Microsoft.
Which is the advantage of the localized Google, I'm sorry, the
Yeah.
Google GPT, which is limited.
Exactly. So now we have a pretty good summary and an idea of what our data set contains. So we see it's 349 entries. So those are data points. We have a rough idea of what is inside all of these columns. We also have the outcome variable. And since we prompted, hey, you're a data analyst, it knows that we want some following steps. So it starts giving suggestions. Should we explore and summarize? Should we clean and prepare data? Should we perform an analysis? You could rely on these if you wanted to. I like to have my own process, but it's important to highlight that you can start to brainstorm with the system towards new solutions. Now, a follow-up question would be, I want to explore what are the target variables. And these are just general questions. It already told us what the outcome variable is, but we'll go back and emphasize on this, adding more context. So I also want to see more on the data types. And I'll actually call these features so it stops calling them columns. Last question is, what appears to be the overall goal? So some data sets are tailored to modeling, others towards clustering. The reason why I'm asking this last question is I know the answer. I've actually worked through this data set on Kaggle myself. I'm on the leaderboard. And I just want to see if ChatGPT is able to think for itself and identify what could we do with this data set. And it should be just about done. So first question, target variables. Now it gives me more detail. And it says it appears to be to classify positive and negative cases, possibly indicating presence or absence of a disease and treatment outcome. Second target variable, that just goes into a little bit more detail on the disease. That's part of our data set. If we remember, it's the first column. Now it gives us a breakdown of the categorical variables and our numerical values, the only one being age. And it's able to identify the overall goals, which is this data set was created for predictive analysis with a very small sample size data set. You could also do descriptive analysis and diagnostic insights, but those are all subsections that could go into modeling. Now, because we said, hey, you're a data analyst, it can actually help you if you're not very experienced, again, with the suggestions at the end. So let's go ahead and move over to the data quality assessment. So I'm just going to copy and paste this question here really quickly since we're running a bit behind.
You do this for multiple data sets. In other words, here you're basically giving one data file and it's pretty obvious you have questions. So I'm going to consider that one. If you have multiple data sets, you have to do some quality analysis. How would you do it?
So the question was, how will you do this for multiple data sets? I believe if you're on the first tier account of ChatGPT, you can upload up to 10 files at once.
So you refer to them by name and.
Yep. And if you have them labeled as, I'm not sure, set 1, set 2, set 3, set n, whatever it might be, it can actually combine them, it can reference them, and it can provide you insights on each specific file before you begin to do something like combining the data sets. However, this is on the paid account, not just on the free account. So keep that in mind. So moving on to the data quality assessment. I want to know if there's any missing values, outliers, or outliers values. So we'll go ahead and send that. And by design, ChatGPT works using Python. In its backend system, it's called Sandbox. Sandbox is standard, so it's reproducible. I believe it uses Python version 3.11. It could also do other things like programming in R, SQL, or C++, but the way it does that is actually by converting the Python language over instead of actually directly developing in Python. And here we begin our quality assessment. There are no missing values, so the data set and all columns are fully populated. That's good to know. And it provides us with a quick numerical summary. The min and max of H also provides the mean standard deviation. Then it looks more into our categorical values. And we see that this right here is something that we might want to address in the future. So a data set containing 109 unique diseases, and this is not a target variable. It's a little fishy to look at. Now, moving on to binary features, we have those again, and our observations, no missing data, no anomalies. And our data range seems to be okay. So our next steps, those are actually some of the next steps that I'm doing, but I'm not going to go ahead and jump there just yet.
When you ask for the analysis, did you ask it to annotate its Python so that you can go and check the Python script for consistency with your goals? I mean, you get results.
Yeah.
But the question, I guess, is, well, how do you check whether those results are in fact valid or?
I'll do that right at the end of this, just so we could have all the Python code and the full analysis together. And that's a very good point. So one, I don't think it's ever provided a analysis where the Python code does not run. That's usually based on the dependencies. If you copy it over to something like Google Colab, it's usually able to resolve those environment dependencies very quickly. Now, when it comes to validating the actual output, I would say you want to use this as a very good intern. You don't want to rely on it as a coworker. So keep that in mind. And just like an intern, the better instructions you provide, the better output it can produce. Okay. Now, on this last section, we'll check for any duplicates in our data set. Why? Because this could produce issues down the line. So we'll also tell it to please remove them to avoid any data leakage and report whatever it might find. By the way, the reason it shows the code is because I have always show code on. If not, it would do this in the background. So, okay, so then it comes back. It tells us it's found 49 rows that are duplicates. We don't want those. So we've said, hey, remove them, and it goes there and removes them. Current data set shape 300 by 10. And if you're not sure, you could prompt a question like, are there any other things we should address at the moment? And then it could start to give more suggestions. I have an outline process already, so we won't go ahead and do that. Okay, and now moving over to EDA. So let's start exploring the data set. First question is, what do distributions of the key features look like? And like I said, it uses Python in the background. Matplotlib is its favorite. If you want to use something like Seaborn, you can actually go on your custom instructions and mention, instead of using Matplotlib, use Seaborn instead. And it'll switch the default from MATLAB to Seaborn. Okay, and looks pretty good, actually. Usually does not do that good of a job plotting the first time around. So a couple other ways I've seen this done is they'll create a different image. So they're all, on different images. It looks like GPT actually this time combine them all, maybe because I have those custom instructions. So although these bar charts are pretty good, they don't give me the exact numbers, and I'm kind of lazy. So for something like this, I actually just want to see these in pie charts instead of going back and annotating each specific bar. And I want to see percentages too, instead of numbers. So you can always shift what type of visualization it's providing you. And there it provides our outcome. And it provides both percentages, everything perfectly annotated. Like I said, you should treat this as a very good intern, not a coworker. So write good instructions should give you pretty good output. At least it'll provide you with whatever you ask it to do. You could go back and say, hey, change the colors. Change the, you could add a legend, you could do plenty of other things, but we're trying to get through this analysis. So we'll go ahead and skip that section. So next on the EDA, we want to see if there are any strong correlations. We want to see strong correlations, patterns, relationships. The reason why I say comma patterns or relationships will actually do all of those as if you're talking to helper intern. And one thing to always keep in mind is these tools should help you do your job more efficiently, not completely replace your job. For example, coding majority of this maybe would have taken me 5 minutes versus 30 seconds using GPT. And that looks awful, right? So this is one of the downfalls with GPT. It's that one, everything is probabilistic. So you could get really good outputs one time. Next time around, you get something like this. Then you have to go back and reprompt. And of course, because it's referencing the specific thing over here, it's going to tell me that it's no strong correlations. But this is why I wanted to show where I save this chat over here. Previously, if we were to ask a question like this, it actually produced this. So be very wary that all of the work might be reproducible. Starting a new chat might actually make the results a little bit different. That's why it's important at the end to always ask for the code, and always ask for the analysis. So let's go ahead and go back over here. And we can say something like, this does not look well. Redo the analysis. And we'll see if this corrects it. It looks a little bit better, but still pretty awful, right? So it fails on that specific section. And ChatGPT is not meant to be a full data analyst. That's what the next section is for. So let's go ahead and move on to the next prompt, which would be as each feature relates to the target variable. Right, and that looks about right. Right here. And there. Okay, lastly, it's going to the cholesterol. It looks like it's slowing down a bit. That might be due to high loads on the servers. Other times it can be a lot quicker. So our insights, that's what we're here for. Symptoms like fever and fatigue appear to have notable association with positive outcomes being disease. So looks like we already have some suggestions here that are pretty good. But I actually want to visualize this using heat maps. Again, it breaks. So even with that additional context, it was not able to correct itself.
What's exactly the difference between this one, this heat map,
Mhm.
and the good heat map that you showed?
So I was just trying to see if with the additional context of, what are the most important features, if it would just like,
So this shows all features,
Mhm.
the good one shows only like relevant features?
yeah,
Oh,
I was trying to also see if it would be able to correct it. Looks like it wasn't. Usually what happens is you'll get a response like you have too many features to view.
Mhm.
So it says here are the top 5 instead.
Oh, I see. So the good heat map that you
Yeah.
showed, it showed only like top 10.
Yeah. Yeah, I was able to detect that automatically versus here we would do some additional prompting and only view
Okay.
some things. Now with that section, let's go ahead and do some feature engineering and visualize. So we'll actually tell it, hey, stop doing EDA. You're not very good at this. Let's move over to feature engineering. And are there any irrelevant or redundant features that we do not contribute to the target? So now it says, here's a couple steps that I could take. And we'll actually just evaluate using variance thresholds. Say like in this step right here, it was able to feel the context out and tell me, hey, I need to break these things up. How should I do it? I should have also done that in the correlation heat map, but didn't do that. Again, because ChatGPT said general LLM, not specialized for data analysis. So based on our variance differential analysis, A7 features were identified as low variance, retained features 39. Okay, good. Just to make things a little simpler on the modeling process, we'll ask to remove those low important features. And while this is loading, looks like we have some questions. And if I miss one of your questions, feel free to thumbs up or type it again. Q&A enabled. So it says, I understand that GenAI does not accommodate deterministic models. Would you agree? Can you share an example using GenAI, one of those models? Unfortunately, that's beyond the scope of this workshop. You can do a lot of things with GenAI, but that I would say you need to have the access to both hardware and the knowledge on how to do so. It says with the instruction would be able to share the entire conversation after the session. Yes, I believe this is being recorded. So the recording should be out. Also, all the materials should be shared on that Google folder. Okay, now that it's done, low importance features removed. Looks like went on ahead with our less than 0.1, retained features 20, and included the main ones. And that looks just about right. I think I might be missing one, but that's okay. And we understand our data. So at this point, we want to see if we need to do one hot encoding. If you're not familiar with one hot encoding, it just means taking something like categorical values, giving them numerical, so we can do some quick modeling. It looks like it's giving me an explanation of encoding. Usually it doesn't do that. But it's actually pretty nice because it provides us with pros and cons instead of just doing what I told it to. Now it's analyzing my own data set. Finally, here's the recommendation. High cardinality variables, like disease. Okay. So to not change the data too much, I plan on doing something like random forest. So let's go ahead and just skip that, at least for this demonstration. So I plan to use a random forest as a baseline. So instead, let's move along to see if we have any imbalances in the classes that might bias the model. However, if you wanted to, you could go very deep into the feature engineering. ChatGPT actually does a decent job at feature engineering versus something like visualizations. You might have to go back and forth with it a little bit more. looks like our data set's pretty balanced. If you wanted to, you could run something like oversampling or smoke. It actually gives you that right there. And also provides proceed with training. Not yet. If you're not sure if your data set should use something like cross-validation or other techniques, you could always ask the model. And asking it allows it to shift its nodes, go back to its knowledge base, and see if it's a good fit for your data set. So again, it's giving us what the topic is, what type of usual techniques will be applied, and then at the end, it should give us an output for a specific data set. And stratify full validation testing. So that looks right. So we can actually just click on its suggestion. Now these little like prompt suggestions, they'll be different everywhere you go. So that's only, these are only based on GPT system. If you go to maybe an LLM that is tuned for programming or for data analysis or for literature review, these suggestions might not be there. And if they are, they might say different things. And as we can see, we could start to do some modeling. It's like, don't have any major issues. Just don't like that old 30 right there. So at this point, we've gone through some analysis of our data set. We've done some simple modeling, some feature engineering. But there are some additional questions that I would like to ask it before ending this EDA. First one being, if this did fairly well in the 70s as a baseline model, can we visualize the feature importance? By the way, one of the most useful things about something like ChatGPT and LLMs is that you can feed in documentation directly, and it will teach you how to use a library or a module. I think that's probably the best use case that I have, because often I have to use different frameworks and learn them very quickly to develop. So it looks like we have the top 15 more important features. See how this time it narrowed them down. It's always supposed to do that. It doesn't always do that. And yep, it looks just about right. So actually, I think maybe we can improve this model. So we can also do unsupervised learning. Like, oh, did it break? Okay, good. So we can also start to use some unsupervised learning to make the model a little bit better, or we can gain more insights. Okay, and looks like there are some clusters, but it wouldn't be real data if it was perfectly clustered every time, right? So cluster 2 being the largest, cluster 1, outlier. Okay, so we could move forward, but let's go ahead and add this clustering to see if it makes our model any better. So right now, what it's doing is it's just experimenting. We're adding our clusters to our previous baseline model to see if we can do some additional work. So updated baseline performance. And as you can see, it actually lowers our accuracy. So we don't want to use it. It's good that it actually is able to identify that it's a worse result, so it won't move forward with it. So since we were running that completely on the full data set, it's important to always say, hey, now let's actually do a test string split. And by default, it uses 80-20. You could shift that to whatever you want. Now let's go ahead and train and evaluate. Gives us a nice breakdown of the F1 scores. And lastly, and especially because this is a medical data set, it looks like the model's not able to pick up that we should really focus on false negatives and false positives. So we need to actually do this by hand and type it in. Now, again, this is just a baseline model. If you were taking this into production, I would, using the code that it provides me, I would redo the analysis, make sure nothing was missed. I would hypertune the model, and I would also use advanced techniques to improve this F1 score. That really depends, but it could go anything from going to custom neural networks to something like ensemble learners. Could do some hyper grid search. Could do a lot of things. By the way, if you want to do these advanced techniques, you're not able to do them within the sandbox because it takes too much computational power and too much time to run. And here, we're finally able to see the misclassified cases. So that's a quick analysis with ChatGPT. One of our earlier questions was, can we get the code? Yes, you can. You can actually say something like, provide me with of Python code. Remember, we said stylization, Python code. Next, we want to say something like the format, which would be as a Py file that can download it. So what it does is it actually makes everything into Markdown that it's done on Sandbox. Sandbox is the background environment, and you need to change the paths. It should be somewhere here. Yep. So you'll need to change that path to whatever path you're working on. And it is all marked down. We'll put it into a Py file and it won't be marked down anymore. I'll open it right after this. Looks like there was an issue, so it's trying again. Okay. And then very quickly there, we saw a sandbox directory on its background. File is empty. Try this again. So you could reprompt it. And you can always go back and forth until it fixes things. Usually it's able to resolve itself. And it's funny, I've done this maybe for the past month. It's never broken before. Yep, question?
Find yourself in the midst of one of these sessions and you realize that somewhere halfway through.
You messed something up.
system Sort of went off the path.
Mhm.
Is there a way of returning this?
Yep. That's a very good question. And the question was, if you find there was a mistake halfway through the process, how can you go back? And you can actually scroll all the way up to wherever you want, and you can go ahead and edit, and it'll branch off into a previous version. So every time you ask a question, it's actually saving that specific state. And we'll go ahead and cancel it right here. So yes, you can always go back and check, or go back and change, say you want an additional analysis. And what's actually pretty cool about that is you can have a branch of like 10 different pages just by editing it. You can click through them on the chat. And let's see here, downloads. So it looks like provides us with all the Python code that we did today. You could always grab this, throw it onto Jupyter Notebook, or run it as a .py file. Usually, what I would suggest is taking it to Google Colab, because Colab will fix most of your dependencies for you. Half of the struggle of data science is just getting things to work. If you're unsure about the sandbox system, you could always ask, what are the dependencies? What's the Python version? And it should provide you with an outline of what it did or how it downloaded things. GPT is actually very good if you're working on something like a Linux terminal. So you could use it to troubleshoot, create virtual environments, guides, things like that, since there is so much documentation on those type of things on the internet. It's compatible with 7 higher. So I would personally say use 3.11 because I know that's what it uses in the background, but it's saying for flexible use, anything above 3.8. Oh, and lastly, you could say something like, what is the summary result? Explain what we did, what we found, and provide me with a PDF. Again, this is a good intern. Just need to ask the correct questions, go back and prompt back and forth. Sometimes they won't understand what you're asking for, and maybe that's on you, maybe that's on the system. But being able to interact is the most valuable skill you could have. While that's typing, let's see if we have any questions. And no new questions yet. Oh, by the way, you could also ask it to do something like create a requirements.txt file. Easier to set up your virtual environment when doing the analysis locally. You could provide it your specific paths that you want it to be in, so then it changes everything. It's more of a plug and play system. Okay. And there outlines pretty much what we did, recommendations. So You could also ask it to write a in-depth report, or you could ask it to say, add all the visualizations, create new ones, shift them, format, whatever you might do. Personally, I create a lot of PDFs and reports with this, but I just have to go back and forth with it. At the end of the day, it's quicker at doing things, and that's why I use it. Now, back to the slides. Turn these subtitles off. So as you could say, there's reliability challenges with GPT. There's hallucinations. And the thing you need to understand is that hallucinations are not a bug, it's a feature. And the reason it's a feature is because it needs to be creative to be a generalized model. There's also numerical inaccuracies. Because the data set that we used was not very complex, and most of the values were just either Booleans or categorical, does not run into these issues. But if you're, say, maybe had matrices with 10, 12 decimals, it might actually run into these issues. Like you mentioned before, there's token limits. So GPT has a capacity depending on what model you're using for the tokens. This can also apply to the prompts that you're typing. I would say the most important thing you need to think about is the lack of security, which is that ChatGPT, no matter what license you have, is not HIPAA compliant at the moment. So, and also there's no on-premise option. That's another downside. And GPT, like I said, it's a generalized model. So it's generalized, it does things and can be very flexible, but you need to guide it, and you might have all the issues that we talked about today. And introducing Julius AI. And Julius AI is a platform that is not a generalized model, although you can use generalized models. This platform is specifically designed for researchers doing data analysis or data science tasks. So we'll go ahead and go through using Julius very quickly. We are running a bit late, as I thought we would. Also, Julius is usually a paid platform. The free tier allows 15 messages. So what we'll do for today is maybe type 5 messages. If you have access to the folder, we can just copy those sections that we did for the analysis, copy and paste, and go through the process just to see how much better it is than ChatGPT at doing data analysis. I'll also include some of these irrelevant questions. It'll filter them out. So just hold on 1 second. And here, Julius AI. And we can go ahead and start a new thread. Oh, looks like we're already on it. And we'll upload a file. We actually want the TMUS data set. Okay. And Julius will go ahead and analyze it for us. This is a data analyst model, no longer generalized. Okay, as we can see, it took a little bit to load, but rather quickly provides us with also clarification as soon as we start. It says a quick summary about what the data set is, what you could use it, and some of the specific details on it. You could also go over to plots, and you could generate plots from the beginning. Something like our glucose measures with BMI, and you can shift all these whatever way you want. it actually will do the full plotting in the background. It does this Python by default, but if you're an R user, you can actually change the whole system to be R up here. So you could also use it for R if you use R for data analysis, which is something that, say, ChatGPT has to translate into R, versus this does it natively. Now here, you could play around with this on your free time. For this, we'll go through the process. Just know that the plots can be and also they're interactive, which is something that GPT does not have. So you can create interactive plots, you can download them, you can do whatever you want, you can combine them, shift axes. And it does this without even having to go directly into the data set, which is what we will do right now in prompt. So I hope everyone can see the screen in the webinar. If anyone's on the webinar, just let me know.
You drop the screen.
I dropped the screen. Oh God. Okay. Okay, so you couldn't see the screen. So we'll go over very quickly. So I've uploaded the data set for the people I didn't see. And Julius AI, because it's a data analyst model, it actually provides us a quick summary of the data set. You could also go to plots and you can generate plots using the data you've uploaded. It's interactive. You can change the overlays. You could change the type of plots. It has plenty of options. You could change the axes. So even just using it as a free platform to do some quick visualizations and just download them, it's extremely helpful. And this doesn't use any of the limited monthly messaging. This is just by being on the platform. Yep.
Instructor is what type of visualization you're interested in? In other words, in this case, it seems
Yeah, it's intuitive. So you can just click on the plot type and it provides you with some, I would say like the most common type of plots. If you want something more complicated, like say a running bar chart race, that's a MP3 output, then you need to prompt that instead. But these are the regular data viz that we will see. You can also, like I said, change the overlays. You could change the X and Y axes, and again, interactive. Now let's head over to the actual table. And you could actually go on this data analysis workflow and just go ahead and copy and paste. And if you don't want to do this at home because you don't want to use the 15 messages, don't do it right now. But I just want to show how well Julius does work and maybe some quirks that might pop up. So as you can see, it starts thinking and it goes through the process. And great. So it answers majority of the questions that we ask it. So like the modeling task, loading, scatter plot. Now we can also just copy and paste the following sections, and I'll actually show why I'm just copying and pasting right after this. And again, if you don't want to use your limited 15 messages per month on the free account, don't copy and paste this right now. Do this on your own data set that you want to explore with. Or you could always do a combination of using GPT, ChatGPT to analyze these things. And if you want more in-depth a viz or analysis, come over to Julie's AI. And so it looks like data assessment quality. We'll check for missing values, outlier duplicates, any suspicious patterns. So that's what we told it to do. Create heat maps. So heat map of missing values. See a bunch right there. Since it does not have eyes, it does not know if it's correctly done. So again, heat maps are always an issue. However, it is able to pull some of the duplicate values and also outline some suspicious values, like zeros being input, likely representing missing data. Provides us with violin plots, provides us with key observations, and recommendations for data cleaning. So we can just trust it, say yes. It's actually proprietary. It's Julius's personalized model. However, if you want to use something like ChatGPT or Sonnet, I believe both of them are available on the paid account. Sonnet is another model that I should probably mention right now. It's very good at programming and software engineering. So if you're looking for a model that is designed for programmers, likely to use Sonnet. And looks like it went through the process. Again, goes over the missing values, outlier treatment, summary statistics after cleaning. That looks good. And then it provides us with a quick summary of what it did. So it looks like it did some imputation, which, by the way, ChatGPT sometimes will break on the imputation portions. So Julie's is geared to be able to do imputation without issues. Now we'll ask it to perform some EDA. Just copy and paste that. You know, if I had to guess what model they used to train, I would say they probably used something like Llama and trained it on only data science and data analysis.
Fine tuning a lot
Yeah.
essentially.
But that's only a guess. It looks like it provides us with a very good EDA. So as you can see, there are irrelevant questions that I typed in, but it's able to filter them out and only focus or attention on those specific portions that do make sense. So distribution of key features, correlation heat map, that's the first one we've seen done correctly. Relationship between features and target, outcome. Okay, so that's pretty good EDA. Now let's perform some feature engineering. And again, I have this process outlined, so if you're not, I say experience when it comes to data analysis, you could use this as a template and use it, you know, within your workflows. So it looks like numerical features have been standardized, no highly correlated features were identified, ensuring no redundancy. Data set is now ready for modeling. Let's go ahead and paste the next section. Which is to consider the train validation splits. So we could see a little issue there using smoke. Smoke gives every LLM an issue. That's because of its dependencies. Sometimes if it's not able to resolve it itself, you'll just say, just use another oversampling technique. Well, it looks like it was able to resolve it while I turned around. And we could see, one, it's a lot cleaner than ChatGPT. Two, does a better job at analysis. It's more consistent. And I would say it's more readable too. You could actually take this and put it into a report.
You actually export this data.
Yep. But I believe only on the paid versions. So our sixth step. So now it's saying, would you like to pursue implementing these recommendations? Move on. So yes, perform these suggestions. They're actually very good ones that I was going to type in. Let's see if smoke breaks again. Ever? Did not break. Let's move on to step 6. Pretty much done at this point, at least in terms of data analysis. Oh, never mind. It's still running the code. And okay, good. So class distribution before and after smoke. Good output. Distributions before and after. That might mess up results a little bit, but we'll see. So now it looks like it's completely balanced. Again, we tried to do smoke with ChatGPT will break because of the current sandbox system. Now we're just analyzing potential challenges. Right before we get to the modeling. Modeling is the next section and the last one. Oh, one question says, tool as an alternative for software developers. That will be Sonnet by Claude, or the other way around. If you look up Sonnet LLM, it'll come up. And next question is, in this way, should we worry about programmer skills in the future if they trust GenAI? No, so you shouldn't worry about programmer skills. If you're a skilled programmer, this will only make you a better programmer because you get to do things faster. You could then program your own LLM to help you out. That's what I've done. I have custom LLMs to help me do all my workflows. And you can think about it as accountants in Excel. It didn't replace accountants. It only made them better. Okay, it looks like this output is done. Have some outliers, mainly in insulin, which is why this data set is very good to practice with. This is a very difficult data set. It took me about, I would say, 9 months to get it to a 98% F1 score after tinkering with it, pretty much all of undergrad. Lastly, let's go ahead and do some baseline modeling. Oops. Can you recommend readings for creating custom LLMs? I would say reading can be very slow. I would say look up a hybrid tuning llama example on YouTube. You could learn a lot in roughly 50 minutes to an hour. If you're following along and trying to program, it might take a little bit longer. Something to consider is that depending on what hardware you have available to you, it might not be possible to hybrid tune these models. It might only be possible to do something like a RAG implementation. If you have a, I would say, a hefty workstation, something with at least 48 gigs of VRAM, then you should be able to hybrid tune something like a Llama 7B to 10B model in a couple, I would say, 2 hours or so of training. We always need to differentiate between theory and application because they're two completely different things. And it looks like the model is done, at least the baseline, and that's roughly to expect about, we'll say in the 70s. Like I said, this is a very difficult data set to get into the 90s. On your free time, you could try different techniques. To give you a hint, I used a 32-layer neural network to solve this, and it was aided through some decision trees.
Like an ensemble.
Kind of. I put the decision tree inside of some of the layers. So just as a way to shift the node a little bit. And also be able to trace what the neural network is doing. Okay, and see, we're done. This is a pretty quick analysis. If you did this by hand, it would take you maybe 3 hours to code everything, create the visualizations, troubleshoot the environment, and so on. Now, the reason why I did just simple copy and paste, other than being very short for time today, is you can actually add this as a workflow on Julie's AI. So you can fully automate this process. You could do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it might be. If we click on one of these, this is a PDF extraction. You just upload the data that you want. It input whatever steps you want the model to take. And you can just do an API push. Don't even have to be in the interface to do this stuff. So that's a running workflow. You clone, or you could design your own. I don't have the other account here. If not, I would show my other ones. But yes, all those steps can be fully autonomous. It can go through stuff for you. You can go to sleep, come back to it.
Step that didn't actually attain. In other words, you develop the workflow, how do you edit that workflow? How do you?
Oh, so if you have the paid account, you can create.
Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, my bad. Yep, so he was saying, how would you edit the workflow? Well, the workflow is whatever you want it to be. As long as you have the paid account, you can just look up a existing workflow. I clicked on these just because mine are not on this account, but on this account, you could access them. And as you could see, it's something like data analysis. It's very simple. Provide data, input those prompts. So that full document that I shared with everyone, data analysis workflow, you can just drop that in there and it'll output everything for you. Whatever the prompts might be or whatever you need them to be, you can go ahead and edit it in any way. So say you might have a different process for data analysis like I did. You might have something like combining multiple data sets and one hot encoding them and doing things like that. But Julius is very flexible in those terms. I will actually jump back to the slides. We have about 15 minutes left, and might skip over some. I might just leave out some and go very quickly over other slides. Okay. So about Julius AI, and like I said, we'll go very quickly. You have a huge advantage. Why? Because not only is it flexible, but also privacy. It's actually built to be HIPAA compliant, FERPA, and GDPR. That's suitable for sensitive data environments, unlike ChatGPT. You can have local deployment options. So that's on one of the tiers of subscriptions, and eliminates the resilience of cloud services. So you have a server at home or at work, you can just go ahead and get that license, allow it, and do the data analysis locally. There's also advanced privacy features. So if you still need to get rid of identifiable information, it has those settings. We didn't go dive into Julius. I just wanted to show it off today. But all these things, when it comes to being extremely secure with data, are built into Julius. And I honestly could talk about Julius for 10 hours or so. And now it's actually specifically tailored for education and academic research. So if you or your lab is looking for a license to help everyone with data analysis, I recommend this one. It's customizable. So remember how we had ChatGPT, a generalized model? Well, we can actually train it on domain-specific data sets. So we could make it a very good and understand the context of medicine, social services, economy, whatever it might be. It has integration with something like Jupyter Notebooks, RStudio, and MATLAB. So if you use those three for analyses, you could use Julius. It enhances equity insight. So that's just, I guess, another small feature we won't cover. And also it's reproducible. Workflows, they stay the way they are. You can download them. You can, like you said, export them. And actually you're doing these things locally, so you might not even need to export them. Advantages over other alternatives. So unlike ChatGPT, the data remains within the institutional control. Also, if you use the cloud version like I was showing today, this cloud version, it deletes your data within 1 hour of uploading it. Only you have access to it, at least that's what they say, and I actually believe them, unlike Microsoft. So it has a focus on academic ethics. So if you train it on domain-specific data, it might give you ethical considerations, not just numerical values of data. You can also fine-tune it. We've already said a little bit about that. Now, Julius AI, this is like a quick grid. I think everyone was probably on the free version, which is not suitable for HIPAA. However, starting the basic plan, you can start with sensitivity all the way up to fully compliant with pretty much everything. So think about that spectrum. If you have some workplace and looking for a license, I think this is the best one on the market for data analysis. The Pro plan is $60 a month. When you think about it, combine all your Netflix accounts, you might be paying more than $60 a month. Basic plan, $20 a month. That's the one that's on this account. What's even better is if you have workflows built already, you have a lot of API requests. So instead of doing things through the GUI, just send API requests, then you can pretty much do all of your work that way. Enterprise, completely unlimited, do whatever you want. And now very quickly, we have about 10 minutes, so rush through everything. You mentioned ITS. We actually have some services here. Yep.
Is your plan of Julius, is there any progress in U of M licensing Julius as a site license? No.
I don't think so. And I don't think I'm authorized to speak about Maisie or UMGPT. If you do want specific information, I would suggest reaching out to the innovations team. So university tools that we can use. So we have Maisie and UMGPT, which are two different systems. On this right here, that's also hyperlinked. So just like the prompting engineering guide, you can go here and actually learn about both of these systems. Security, I would say Maisie is moderate sensitivity. So only for FERPA. Same thing for UMGPT. Usability and customization. So you might be able to use Maisie a little bit better. However, if we want a more flexible approach, UMGPT is the way to go. Maisie, you can hop right into it. UMGPT, you might take some technical know-how on how to create these models and tune them the way you want them to. So cost and resources. So Maisie initially might be the better option. UMGPT can get very expensive since it runs on GPUs. For research specific purposes, Maisie, it's just more exploratory, a little lower level. UMGPT, more advanced, you can use it for NLP, things like that. Like I said, again, it's moderate sensitivity. So unlike Julius, you can't really use HIPAA compliance servers or anything like that, at least not that I know of yet. Key takeaways from this quick rundown is that Maisie, both UMGPT, moderate sensitivity, intuitive, minimal text setup, advanced, requires customization. Cost is low upfront, potentially scalable, higher upfront, better for sustained use. So if you're building an app, you actually want to go with UMGPT. Best use cases, general, advanced. And as a quick side note, UMGPT does have access to the ChatGPT 4.0 model that we host locally. It also has access to Llama, the 405B, and it might have access to Sonnet, the software engineering one. I'm not exactly sure. Now, recommendations for researchers when conducting research. You need quick access, use Maisie. When you have a little bit more time, use UMGPT, so do a quick transition. If you are looking for something for restrictive data sets, consider using other things within the university. And we'll actually do quick slides. I work for ARC, and we have a couple of computing resources. So we have Great Lakes, so that's your general use, Armis 2, they can be HIPAA compliant. And Lighthouse, if you're looking for a flexible environment or something custom built to process a specific thing, that we can build that for you. This can be enclaved, so no data leaves at all. If you're a researcher, so faculty, you can actually get a free account. It's called the UMRCP, and that includes roughly 80,000 CPU hours compute and about 100 terabytes of storage. This storage can be flexible. You could say very sensitive data and public data, and you can manage it yourself. Yep.
You mentioned tuning. What kind of tuning opportunities does this kind of machine, in other words, restrictions within the context of the medical sponsor accounts?
Yeah. So if you want something like a hypertuned model for a specific purpose, you can actually request something like UMRCP sponsored account, and you can use some of those compute hours to set up something like a local LLM on it. We can help you set this up. You could ask a systems team if you're having issues with, say, the environment, or maybe you're troubleshooting the model. You could always reach out, and we can try to help out in whatever way we can. So we have about 5 minutes, so I just want to talk about local LLMs. So you could self-host these models, and it's greater security, customization, and control when compared to external services like Maisie, UMGPT, or ChatGPT. Platforms like Llama make this process extremely simple. Whether you're on Windows, Ubuntu, or Mac, they have a distribution for everything. Key benefits is that you have full control over everything that happens in your computer. So you're the one that's responsible. And I guess this is just redundant at this point. You have full control over your data. So you can have it completely offline and transfer over things through hardware instead of through the web. You also have three main things that I want to highlight. It's fully customizable. So you can hyper tune your models, whatever use case you want. It can be enterprise, it could be research, usability. Although it's pre-configured, there's a lot of tools out there to tune and or hyper tune or even just create like vector tables with Olama that allow you quick access to information. The advantages, you can be super sensitive data. It could be pipelines, it could be chatbots. You know, I think the limitations are more so your creativity and time rather than what you can't do. Also, it can be cost effective if you get the correct hardware for home. So, and this is a fixed investment. Also, things are getting better and cheaper as we go. You can get 2 gaming GPUs, slap them together, and do some pretty cool projects. It's ideal for high volume and long-term research projects. So personally, I have 2 home desktops that I do this stuff on. And you could also not rely on anything but your own machine. It's comparison to use cases. We'll outline Maisie and GPT, but pretty much everything else except Julius slots into this. Moderate sensitivity to highly restricted. Customization is limited if you use the university resources like GPT and Maisie. Here, fully customizable. Cost variable, so depending how many times you're doing API calls and how often you're using it, your bill might go up, might go down. You never know. Here, once you buy it, it's yours. So you get to do as much computing as you want. Be aware of the DTE bills. Offline use not available, so you'll always need internet connection here. Here, you can have them completely enclave off the grid offline. And with that, this ends today's workshop. It looks like we're still 2 minutes early, so we made it. Thank you for everyone that joined today. I'll take any questions first from chat and then in person. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. Julius has a 50% discount if you're from any type of educational institution. So if you're a researcher or a student, those prices that you saw are slashed in half. Can you recommend readings for custom LLMs? So we answer that. What are the tons? I'm not exactly sure if Kevin's question was a typo. We'll skip it for now. In the Julius AI tiers, are there limits to the number of users? So yes, so single users is the basic one. But if you mean like being signed out of other accounts when you sign into one, I haven't had that issue, at least yet. Someone said, thank you. Can you give an estimate of what it might cost to give custom type specs? Okay, so Kevin, you said an estimate of what it might cost to or give us some typical specs on a machine. So I do believe MIDAS is having a workshop in the future on local LLMs. I'm more than happy to host it or be part of it. I could tell you one of my machines, the first one I built, uses 2 3090 GPUs. Each one of those was about $500 or $600. And the CPU processor, you don't really need it for training these things, so you can get a very cheap one. You can buy used hardware, which I recommend people to do. Everything's usually like 70% off. The only thing that matters are the GPUs and your RAM. RAM can be used, GPUs can be used. Total cost of this machine was about $2,000 with the ability to hypertune models up to like 14B. So if you're building something niche, it's the way to go. What's the max file size for Julius? So I think that really depends on your tier. And then another question, I see light or standard for Julius users. Whereas the Pro, if you just go to the licensing or billing on your account, it should pop up there. The Pro account is the most expensive tier. What local models work well for you? So local models that might work well, if you're doing something like RAG, I recommend using Nematron by NVIDIA. Something like a 7B. It's usually more than good enough for if you're doing information retrieval. If you're using, it's a program code Llama 7B. Actually, let me go ahead and end the slideshow. And I'm actually running these things locally, at least some of these on this laptop. So these are the models that are currently on my laptop and run. None of these are hyper-tuned. These are all the standard ones. The hyper-tuned ones, I keep them on my own computer. And you could just download as many as you want, test them out. There's different purposes to each one. If you go to the Ollama website, you can read the specific purpose that we're designed to do. I like Code Llama. It's very quick. So you could say something like, write a 16 layer neural net using Keras. Oops, misspelling right there. We'll see if it catches it. Yep. And this is completely offline. So if I turn off the Wi-Fi, I can still use it. And it looks like it did that correctly. And you could always just copy, paste, same thing. So the important thing is that you understand prompting. So how you interact with the models that transfers over to anything you do. And also understand that you might need to check back on its work at times. These models aren't perfect. Treat them as a good intern, not as a coworker, and especially not a replacement for your job. Okay, and we have a GeForce 1080 gigabyte on our machine. It seems like we might be close. So Kevin, if you have a 1080 that's 11 gigs of VRAM, you can run these on inference. So what that means is that you can run the models as I am right now on my Mac. And with 11 gigabytes of VRAM, probably up to maybe a 9B will be reliable. But if you want to hyper tune these models, you would need a lot more VRAM, usually at least 30. I would recommend going with 48. I think that that's it for the online questions. Any in-person questions? Yep.
Mention RStudio integration. Is there something where RStudio can actually feel part of the language model? Or, I mean, I'm trying to think of how to get the two to work together.
And in terms of Julius, yes. So there's integration with MATLAB, Jupyter Notebook, and RStudio. So whatever platform you're doing analysis on, you could integrate it. And also there's APIs. So I like to just write bash scripts and send stuff over. It's a little easier for me. Any other questions? Yep.
So you mentioned a lot of different tools. What do you personally use in your work?
What do I personally use? So I use Julius for specific sensitive data. And as my everyday drivers, I use Llama models that have been hyper-tuned to whatever purposes I want.
So in my understanding, if it's like fine-tune models like Llama, you need good data sets with specific like examples of tasks that you're solving. Where did you like create those data sets yourself?
Yeah, so I created those data sets, also augmented some of them.
Can you give me an example of like a task that you create? Like what does the data set look like?
So one, they should be tabular to be able to train. And two, as much data as you want, you could fit. It will just be longer in training. The more data that you want, the easier it is to hyper tune the model. I would say my most useful skill is I'm very good at web scraping. So data collection is one of my, I'd say, strongest skills, and that's why I collect the majority of the data that I use. Are you thinking for a specific problem, or?
I'm just like trying to understand what kind of tasks would benefit from fine tuning as opposed to doing RAG. So as far as I know, RAG is useful for domain adaptation when you want an LLM to work with your data. So like you already have a lot of like text data and you want the model to be able to interact with the data, as opposed to fine tuning where you're giving. So like fine tuning is supervised learning, as in you give it examples of what you want to get from the model. So what are those examples that you give? Like you give it like Python scripts to do some kind of analysis that you wanted to do, or just like questions and answers?
Yep. So, and in terms, I would say, of IT, I can give you a very good example. So if we have new tickets that are coming in unassigned, you're likely to want to grab those tickets and use a RAG to be able to identify to what teams do these tickets go to based on the frequency and historical values that we have saved within that RAG. However, to create an automated response like a chatbot, we probably want to hybrid tune the model to have access to the RAG, pull on previous data, and also contain some domain knowledge to write the responses. So RAG, use it to just pull information. Hybrid tuned, use it to actually do the task. Any other questions? All good? Okay, great. Well, let's see, any more questions online? Nope. So thank you for everyone joining today, and hopefully see you soon. Goodbye.